call the meeting to order. We have approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
And second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then approval of the minutes from April 22nd, 2025.
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so no consent agenda items and no administrative session items, but we do have a legislative session. And Josh, you'll be presenting that, correct? Yes. Excellent. Good to go? It's Paul Washburn seeking a recommendation to amend section
We just know that we're gonna.
11.6.0130, protection of creek corridors of Springville City Code.
Thank you, Chair of Planning Commission. This is specifically pertaining to, as we discussed at the previous meeting of this agenda item, south of the high school adjacent to Hobble Creek. And the goal of the applicant is to increase the buildable depth on for residential lots in a proposed subdivision there. The current code requires a 50-foot setback from essentially the top edge of the creek bank, which is inclusive of a 20-foot recreation and maintenance easement. Staff has developed a staff proposal, working community development and public works working together. And you've seen that in your staff report. This essentially reduces park strip width to a minimum of 3 feet, so somewhere between 8 and 3 feet is permissible for streets specifically abutting Hobble Creek lots. So lots, the street has to access lots that abut Hobble Creek and are subject to the maintenance and trail easement and the 50-foot setback. So it applies only between 1200 East and 1700 East. It applies only to subdivisions with fewer than 8 lots, again with the required recreation and maintenance easement. It also requires trees planted on private property at 30 feet on center, 5 feet from the back of walk. So we're essentially putting street trees on the backside of walk. No trees are permitted in the park strip, but it must be landscaped with round cover shrubs or sod. It can't be paved like is otherwise permissible in the city for narrow park strips. And requires, as is standard for our landscaping areas, 50% plant coverage within 3 years. So this is essentially the cross section. You have your standard pavement width, a half width of your 29-foot pavement, your 2-foot curb and gutter, a 3-foot park strip, a 5-foot walk, and then trees planted at 5 feet from the back of walk on 30 feet on center along the back of walk, using the species and the planting specifications as established by our ordinance, which is essentially 2-inch caliper ball and burlap.
Question on that, is that going to be, are they going to be required of the owner to purchase, or are they going to be provided by the city?
They will not be provided by the city.
Not provided by the city, okay.
No. They're never provided by the city, in the sense that they're never paid for by the city. In a subdivision, typically the developer of the subdivision pays a street tree fee to the city, and then we handle the installation of those.
I
But
see.
But upkeep is always by the owner, right?
upkeep is always by the city
By the
in
city.
park strip trees.
Park strips.
In park strip.
We
But
really
these would
don't
be-
want people.
These would be owner. upkeep?
These are private trees on private landscape.
But we're requiring those trees to be on the land.
Correct.
Yes, but we're not going to.
That is a staff proposal.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah, I saw
not going,
that.
as a city, we're not going to have them pay into them and
No.
then us.
No, because they
Install
don't have
them.
park strip trees. They don't have street trees in the technical sense.
So that's where the agreement comes from, is just, or the proposal from staff rather, is just saying, all right, we'll make it more narrow, but here's how we.
Correct. That helps to mitigate.
And then did I see something about shrubs? I can't remember.
Yes, you can have low profile plantings, shrubs, ground covers, or sod. Basically, what you could, just the standard.
Yeah, in the park strip.
You just can't. The only deviation from standard city code and why we wrote it into this section instead of referencing that section is that we not interested in having a reduced park strip and then permitting it to be paved. So the reduced park strip deviates from the right-of-way standards we have, and generally from the general policies of the general plan, but we've tried to mitigate that by requiring landscaping in the park strip and those tree requirements behind the walk. And we maintain the intent of the active transportation plan by maintaining the 50-foot setback with the 20-foot trail and maintenance easement, or access and maintenance easement. And again, the concern remains that there may be street aesthetics and comfort impacts to that reduced park strip. Trade-offs, some of the co's are that pros. Co's are when you have pros and cons in the same word. Pros, it enables development flexibility for small subdivisions, but it still maintains the easement for trails and maintenance along the creek. The landscaping rules keep us from just having a concrete park strip. On the cons, we don't have trees in the park strip, which is contrary to our standards in general. It does set somewhat of a precedent for future consideration of future deviations from code. And I just needed to mention that the DRC, or our Development Review Committee, which is the interdepartmental committee that reviews these applications, felt that there was code compliant development was possible in this area without the proposed amendment.
So was it the DRC that ultimately, because I noticed in the document it said initially you guys, the staff was against it, right?
Correct. Were you
That was
here
at
last
our
time?
last meeting.
I wasn't.
Oh.
Yeah, you weren't here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me know I
Sorry.
wasn't here.
We discussed it at the last meeting.
Okay, so that's why it's new to me. Okay.
So Josh, before you get to the staff recommendation, I guess one of my questions is, has Public Works, is there any flexibility now or in the future on the reduction of our gutter pan with our curb and gutter and going from 2 feet to 18 to 12 or even a zero gutter?
I doubt it, because it's really a maintenance and longevity issue. If we're going to get rid of width from face of curb to face of curb, we'll just take it out of the asphalt. But it's hard to place catch basins in when you don't have a curb to set the curb and gutter to set them in. You know, it wears out faster if there's a joint at the low point, the water infiltration.
Yeah, I guess I just asked because I know, seeing other developments, other places, I mean, they just have the 6-inch basically curb, and the asphalt's acting as the gutter,
Right.
and they just replace the curb.
Right.
And so, is that ever under consideration in terms of
I don't know. That's
allowing
not
that?
a question we've asked. I don't know that it makes a difference in terms of the section. It may be a cost difference, but typically when it's a 6-inch monolithic curb, it's 18 inches below grade, so it's probably a wash in terms of cost. But if we're looking to narrow the asphalt, I would guess, totally speaking out of turn, that you'd be more likely to narrow the asphalt than get rid of curb and gutter. If we're just
Well,
looking
I
to
was
get rid
trying
of,
to go through the back door and see if we could narrow our street section a little bit, but
yeah, they can do math.
yeah.
I mean, a lot of places, when I went to school back east, they just use a monolithic granite curb, which for some reason is cost effective out there.
We got plenty of granite, right?
I know. I thought we had lots of granite too.
It is kind of crazy.
And we don't have to ship it from Vermont.
Their curbs are all granite. It's
Yeah,
nuts.
that's cool.
They look great.
It's rough hewn too.
Yeah, rough hewn on the face. Yeah. But I can't give you a definitive answer on that. I don't know if they've ever considered it. I'm just thinking out loud. So the staff recommendation is to recommend approval of the amendment as developed by staff, with the rationale that it balances the needs of the applicant with city standards via some strict conditions. It does depart from some general plan goals, and we obviously want to evaluate if the conditions sufficiently protect the city's interests. But this is your proposed motion, and I can take any questions you have now, or you can hear from the applicant, and then we can have have further discussion.
The located between 1200 East and 1700 East, is that some kind of natural thing, or is that,
It is, it limits it only to the Clyde property.
okay, so this is basically
Yeah, there's no other developable
code
land on the
for-
creek between 12th and 17th,
this property.
correct?
I have a question real quick. So on the 30-foot center on the trees,
Mhm.
then you must be able to like move like a driveway or something?
Yes, you don't have to put it in the middle of your driveway.
I know, I understand. I just, so that we're all on the same page, that should be good then.
Same with street trees.
Yeah.
They're not required where there's not
So
park
you
strip.
might slide them and then just
Mhm.
adjust it, okay?
Yeah, if you've got 100 feet of frontage, we expect you to have 3 trees essentially.
Okay, that's just a clarification, so.
Correct.
Thank you.
That's how we handle the code.
Any other questions for Josh right now?
No.
All right, thank you. We could have you come on up.
Well, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Paul Washburn, and we had a fairly lengthy discussion a month ago, and hopefully we don't have to go through that again. I'm sure you'd like to go home and get something to eat, but,
Just for me, could we rehash everything?
well, we can.
Yeah, he was online watching.
At the conclusion of the last meeting, we were directed to meet with staff again, and we have done so. I've met with Josh and Wilfred Haslam and with city administrator and tried to go through things. This property is a very unique piece of property. First of all, it's an infill, which is a little bit more difficult. We've got the creek going through it. There's some topography issues, number of things that make this different than if you just had a flat piece of ground out in the middle of the, the West Field somewhere. It's also a sensitive environment. We want to make sure that the trees that are on site can be preserved as much as possible, try and protect that stream bed. Actually had a geotechnical company up there the last week going through and doing a real intensive study to make sure we do things and we're able to preserve as many of those trees as we possibly can. As cities grow up, and I've had a lot of experience in Provo and Orem and American Fork, infill seems to become a little more difficult. We've got a growing population and people need places to live. We need to find the best way to utilize the property, and really appreciate the efforts of staff, because I think that this compromise we've come up with really protects the city, but it'll also allow this property to develop the best way that it possibly can. Anyway, I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
None.
None for me.
Okay, well, if I bored you that bad, I'll sit down. Thank you.
As this is a legislative item, we will open a public hearing. If you come to the front, make sure that you state your name and address.
Not seeing anybody coming to the podium. I move that we close the public.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, discussion.
I'd say well done, Josh, and to the petitioner. I mean, I feel like we're not seeing any maps, or like any sort of plat material, which I think is actually helpful in this case.
We had what we showed last time. We're trying to straighten out one real crooked property line. We're trying to work through that with the adjacent neighbor.
Yeah.
And so I think hopefully even before this gets to the council, we'll have a final plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Move on with it.
But that said, I think the way this has landed, it's very specific, I think, between 1200, 1700, as well as limiting the number of lots. It kind of provides that buffer that does protect the city, so I think.
I think the lot limitation is effective. I feel like the 1200 to 1700 is, yes, it will stop anyone from doing anything without coming and getting it code amended. But I don't see why, I don't see why we wouldn't have to, consider or let them have those areas too. They met all of the other
Agreed.
requirements.
Yep.
So, it's,
It is opening that door.
yeah,
basically.
it's opening that door, and And, but with the other requirements, I think that it will limit things and help us to keep that, but
I assume this was the majority of the conversation last time.
no.
No,
It wasn't?
no. A lot of it had to do with the right of way width in terms of they were requesting a reduction of the right of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And along with that, and this is more of a question, I guess, for you, Josh, with the discussion is, say someone does come to, try and apply this in a different part of the city, and it's not in alignment with our general plan, as you said, are we essentially making it much easier for them to have a 4-foot park strip and not meet our other city standards?
That's a hard question to answer because it would require legislative action, as Commissioner Baker noted. So you probably would have as good an idea of as I would, whether if someone else came and made the same ask, if they'd receive the same consideration. That's really, because it would go through the same process.
Your codes aren't up there anymore, but my greatest concern is back to precedent. And, I mean, you brought it up a minute ago. And are we prepared to make these exceptions in the future? And I know there's some limitations that make it so this is unique. But I think
just as
that's,
easy as
for
we
me,
wrote those in there, they could be written out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, that for the commissioners, that would be my
That's the
concern.
only thing, because one of the things that we pointed out last time this was brought up was they're just east of this property towards Bartholomew. There's a few other larger properties that are along Hobble Creek that could easily be developed.
Yeah.
So, I don't know where to land there in terms of
I think the
trying to help the applicant develop their property, because it is a difficult piece of property, but also trying to protect the city's interests there.
I think the trees in the yard.
Could I make a comment towards that?
Yes.
Sure.
sorry.
Come on forward.
I'll say.
Well, I think one of the challenges we have as a city is that we have these few infill properties that are in our community. And when the infill properties are there and all the properties are developed around them, nobody sat down and said, well, how are you gonna develop this infill property within the zoning ordinance when the time comes to do that? And so I've actually developed some lots in Pleasant Grove where they actually made us draw out the ground that wasn't ours to show that you could actually make it work within. But we haven't done that as a city, and so we have a few of these odd lots around. And at one time, we had a PUD ordinance that allowed people to do private unit developments where they could actually have a private road and keep it all private. And we eliminated those a long time ago because they created some problems. Like, for example, I remember one of them, while I was the mayor, they came to us and said their development was about 20 years old, and all of a sudden the roads need to be redone. They said, well, we pay taxes like everybody else. How come you won't come and do our roads? Well, because it's a private road. And so the council way back decided we're not going to have private unit development. So somewhere we've got to build within our code some way to allow these infill properties to be developed. And sometimes they're difficult pieces. Like, I mean, the challenge that we have is that part of the property goes into the creek. We're providing a 50-foot offset from the bank of the creek and those types of things. And if you just took and laid it out flat and said, well, this would be easy to. In fact, the person I bought it from showed me you could put 23 lots in there. Somebody platted it out for him. There's just absolutely no way. I mean, there's probably going to be, we get done with, if we ever develop the other half of the property, there's only probably going to be maybe 3 or 4 lots on the other side. So you're probably going to have like 7 or 8 or 11 lots. And I mean, it's some really nice property in our community. And so we need to allow it to be developed so it can be, it can be some nice property, because we don't have a lot of like creekside property and nice properties like that. And so we're just trying to make it so that if somebody's going to build a house there, they're not like trying to figure out how to get a house on a 30-foot wide buildable area, because you've got 50 feet coming from the creek bank, and so that's what we're trying to allow. And there are already a lot of natural trees in that area along the creek bed, and so if we do it this way, we can preserve as many of those trees as we possibly can. That's what we want to try to do. But I think really our planning commission, our city council really needs to sit down and say, we need to have an ordinance that allows some modifications from the typical code in that area on some of these infill. And so this is kind of a stopgap thing. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say you do this on every piece, or you have to consider it the same way. I think what you need to do is develop some kind of code. And Josh and I have talked about this, and I've talked to Troy about it, is somewhere we need to have, and there is, and Josh should probably address this better than I can, but there is a place where if there's some benefit to the city, that you can allow for some modifications, right? Because you've done that in a couple of instances in that. And, what's that? Well, yeah, the council can. The recommendation of the staff and the planning commission. If the council doesn't listen to the planning commission, why do you have planning commission? You know, so they need.
That's what we try to ask.
They need to respect what you guys put forward to them, and that. If they don't like what you're doing, they can replace you, I guess.
That'd be a bummer.
Yeah, yeah. Most of you say, I'm okay at that. I could use those times. But I think the point of the issue is we have some infill properties in our community, and as we try to fill those up, and as the community gets more full and people are looking for places to build, somehow we need to have built into our codes to be able to do some modifications to make those fit on that. So this is kind of a stopgap, I would say. I wouldn't say this is something that you'd want to try to do every time, but if you develop that in your code sometime in the next several months, then I think when somebody comes to you, you have a place and plan or a plan that they can actually adhere to, and you can make some modifications, and it's okay.
Thank you very much.
So that's just my thoughts on it.
Thanks. The one thing I would also add to Mr. Clyde's comments, it's not like we don't need homes here in Springville. I mean, we want more people here, and we want to fill up where we can.
Yes.
Well, and this is a substantial improvement. If you go just to the
Absolutely.
east of this, those homes are built like right on the creek.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yep.
those
That's
homes
good.
are right on the creek. This will provide that buffer, and it has been something that's kind of moved that direction, so
Well,
anyway.
I think it is important to note as well that it can be developed without this. That the development, there is enough property there to develop, but just not the way that they want. And so that's an important thing to just remember and acknowledge, that this is a change so that they can develop it the way that they want, not that this is the only way to get it developed. In many other cases, with these infill properties, or very oddly shaped properties, or properties with these natural hindrances, they've been not possible to develop unless there were exceptions made. And so that needs to be kept in mind as well, that this is so that it can be developed the way that they want it to, not the only way to develop it.
And that's, I think, the biggest thing here is that it currently doesn't align with the general plan. And we're in the process of updating our general plan. And like what Mr. Clyde brought up, I think we need to address the fact that there needs to be an infill portion of that general plan that allows for flexibility, such as a landlocked property like this. But that being said, we don't have that current general plan in place.
Yeah.
So we don't have an exact date for when the general plan is going to be updated. So it's a sticky situation. But either way, I think the current proposal as written, like what staff is recommending, is
the stopgap. And it could also be used, Josh, in the future as not just a stopgap, but maybe a step in the direction that we need to go to address this, to address this, to add it to the plan that Hunter was talking about.
Because
And-
if it were me, like if we were to have an infill clause in our new general plan, I don't necessarily think that you should limit the number of lots, per se. I think you should be able to build as many as you can to be able to get them to fit, but at the same time, currently as proposed, that's kind of where staff has landed for a reason to protect the current general plan standards.
Yeah. Well, kind of with that, what's the contingency if it, this is, I guess, a question for the applicant. With Mr. Clyde had said that it was, add 4 and then 8 and maybe 11. And so what would
They're years apart.
be the 11?
Right now, the intent is to develop the lower portion of the property. That's all that's on the table at this point, and that's what we want to move forward. I think one of the things that's important is, and you brought it up yourself, Chairman, that property could be developed under this existing code. But it's not the best way to develop it. It doesn't preserve the trees, it doesn't preserve things the way that they could be. This is not why an area where we're trying to cram 40 or 50 houses into a postage stamp. We're not trying to be vineyard at all. These are, 10 to 20,000 foot lots, or big lots. It's going to be a nice area. I think one of the things as a planning commission you have to look at is enforcing the existing law is a big part, but also the planning. Plan so things are done the best way. Make it look as good as you can. Make it, as responsive to your population as you possibly can. I work in a lot of cities, and every city's got a different personality and a different way they do things. In Orem, for example, we have what's called PD zones. And if you got more than an acre and a half of ground, you can write your own zone. And Planning Commission spends a lot of time looking at each one of those, and they're placed to a specific neighborhoody thing, but it's worked out really, really well. PDs are probably the best maintained properties in the city now. Provo has got a different way of doing it, similar but different. Orem, I think, has got 65 different PD zones now. I wrote 40 of them, but and American Fork is kind of going that direction too. There's just a recognition that every property is unique in some respects. Again, we got something out in the west end of the city that's perfectly flat. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly when you've got a nice area with some real sensitive areas and things you want to preserve, it makes sense to move forward. And I think, as was mentioned before, this ordinance isn't going to fit every situation, but it gives you an opportunity to look in an isolated place, say, does this work? Did it work well? And then maybe use it as a model for other areas in the future if you decide to move forward with it.
Thank you very much.
I don't have anything more.
No, I mean, I think this is a good way to compromise and figure out how to best use this piece.
We appreciate your work. We asked you to, when we continued it, so thank you.
Yeah, we definitely want to
Yeah.
thank the petitioners and the staff for the time that they've put into reconsidering this. It's a wonderful effort.
I'll make a motion if that's all right.
Okay.
I move to recommend approval of the revised staff proposal to amend section 11-6-130, protection of creek corridors of Springville City Code.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the motion passes. And thank you very much. Next, it'll go up to the city council and move forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Josh.
And Josh, do we have any other items that we are unaware of? No? Well,
We have signatures.
we will, but I'll entertain any motions.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Seconded. All in favor? Aye. All right.